Welcome to this episode of Once Upon a Crime. This month, I'm bringing you the story of 3 terrifying years that unfolded for residents of a small California city. Between 1970 and 1973, a series of murders rocked Santa Cruz, a once peaceful beach community. Before it was all over, residents would live through unimaginable horrors. A prominent family wiped out in a mass murder by a deranged killer, and 2 serial killers working simultaneously but separately in their midst. For part 1 of this series, click on the playlist Murder City or find the link below. In this video, we'll pick up the story at the tail end of 1971. John Linley Frazier's trial had just concluded, and he was sentenced to die. While the courtroom drama played out for one Santa Cruz killer, another was moving into town. Edmund Emil Kemper III would become one of the most infamous serial killers on record. By the time he arrived in Santa Cruz as a 22-year-old in 1971, Kemper had already been convicted and served time in prison for a double murder. Less than a year after his release from prison, he would move to town and over the next 2 years would commit a series of gruesome murders that would forever cast a dark shadow over sunny Santa Cruz. I've taken an unprecedented deep dive into the co-ed killer to provide details about Kemper's life and crimes you haven't heard anywhere else. This is part 2 of Murder City, Santa Cruz, California, 1970 to 1973. Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer. In 1971, Santa Cruz had barely begun to recover from the shocking mass murder of the Ota family. Many hoped that all would return to normal as soon as the trial was over and the press and television cameras left town. However, there were signs that life would remain forever altered by the unprecedented violence John Linley Frazier had brought to their community. Residents began locking their doors for the first time and purchased strong deadbolts and security systems. Gun sales skyrocketed, and parents began keeping their children indoors. The population of the town, over half retirees and mostly conservative, changed seemingly overnight with the growing number of hippies, aka longhairs. Some longtime residents blamed the new college, the University of California, Santa Cruz, for attracting undesirables. While they had felt pride when the new university was proposed for their community, they now viewed it as a mistake. UCSC was, quote, filled with hippies who smoked dope and who knew what else. That was the chatter heard around town. Frazier had been one such, quote, drugged out hippie, and look at the results they I told you so'd each other when discussing Frazier's crimes. Strangers were looked upon with growing unease and suspicion, which was problematic for a town whose economy depended on summer tourism. Another thing that irked Santa Cruzans was that the tourists now not only came to enjoy the surf or the Santa Cruz Beach boardwalk, but also to drive through the town on a murder tour, looking for landmarks like the Catalyst Club, where Frazier had drunk beer and shared his end-of-days delusions. Some even ventured up Rodeo Gulch Drive, hoping to catch a glimpse of Dr. Ota's murder mansion. But even though the multiple murders had occurred just up the road from their college campus, for UC Santa Cruz students, life carried on. Like most of us when we're young, they believed they were untouchable. UC Santa Cruz is a beautiful campus set among the redwoods, but it's not easily traveled. Situated about 5 miles from downtown Santa Cruz on rolling hills, walking is not always practical. In 1971, hitchhiking was a standard mode of transportation for many students without cars. Young people, even women alone, were frequently seen on and around campus with their thumbs out, accepting rides from strangers. One man took particular notice of these hitchhikers. Edmund Emil Kemper III had been in a time warp for the past 5 years. He wasn't used to the level of freedom he saw enjoyed by pretty young co-eds, walking, biking, and hitching through the picturesque California coastal town. They seemed to be everywhere, hitching rides to the beach, with their thumbs out at exit ramps along Highways 17 and 9 through the redwoods, and near Highway 1 to travel the route that ran north to south along the coast. Watching these young, seemingly carefree young women fueled longtime fantasies held by Kemper, fantasies that began when he was just a boy. They had only grown in intensity during the 5 years he was locked up at the California Youth Authority and Atascadero State Hospital. a stint he'd done for a double murder committed when he was just 16. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born in Burbank, California on December 18, 1948, the second of 3 children. His father was Edmund Emil Kemper II, called E.E., an electrician and World War II veteran who'd served in the Special Forces. His mother, Clarnell, was an imposing woman who stood 6 feet tall, but appeared petite next to her 6'8" husband. Edmund III, called Guy by his family, would inherit his parents' stature, growing to 6'9" and weighing 280 pounds as an adult. With his older sister Susan, 6 years his senior, and younger sister Ellen, nearly 3 years younger, Ed grew up in a home filled with tension. His parents' loud, frequent fights created an undercurrent of instability. When he was 4, his father left for 2 years to work at an atomic bomb testing facility, a decision that would strain the family's already tenuous bond. Though Ed admired his father's war stories and collection of medals, machetes, and bayonets, the man behind them failed to connect with his son. By Clarnell's account, E.E. was stern with the girls and overprotective of his only son, yet inattentive in ways that mattered most. When Ed's father finally returned, he found a household on the brink of collapse, with Clarnell increasingly turning to alcohol to cope with raising 3 children on her own, including young Ed, who displayed increasingly odd behavior since he was a toddler. From a young age, Ed's mind was consumed with macabre fantasies. He coerced his sisters into playing gas chamber, where he acted out executions. The girls' reluctance grew into horror when Ed began decapitating their dolls. At 10, his obsession escalated to cruelty towards animals, burying the family cat alive and later decapitating it. Years later, he repeated the act with another family cat, keeping its body parts hidden in his closet. At the age of 9, Ed's life took another blow when his father left the family for good, though not without accusations of Clarnell mistreating their son. He discovered Ed had been banished to the basement for 8 months, isolated in the dark. Clarnell would defend her actions, saying that Guy's behavior, his obsession with death, and his sexual acting out, although it went unstated how this was manifested, made her worry he'd harm his sisters. To prevent this, and to allow her to sleep at night without worrying about the girls, Clarnell created a makeshift bedroom in the basement for her son. The below-ground space was accessible only by a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, over which Clarnell placed a heavy table to secure it after sending her son to bed each night. Ed's parents separated in 1957. 2 months after their divorce was finalized in 1961, E.E. remarried. Guy was devastated to learn that his father's new wife had a son just 2 years older than him. He was jealous of the boy and felt he'd been replaced. Ed repeatedly asked to live with his father, but neither of his parents would agree. Clarnell relocated the children to Helena, Montana, and attempted to rebuild their lives with a new husband. Ed's stepfather, Norman Turnquist, tried to bond with him through fishing and hunting, but the effort did little to quell the growing storm within the boy. At his new school, Guy's towering stature and awkwardness made him a target for bullies. Isolated and feeling rejected, he retreated further into a world of violent sexual fantasies. By age 15, the cracks in Ed's psyche had widened to chasms. In 1963, he ran away from Montana to his father's home in California, desperate for his acceptance. However, his father's remarriage created a new family dynamic in which Ed did not belong. Jealous and aggressive towards his stepmother and stepbrother, Ed quickly wore out his welcome. After just a month, his father sent him back to Clarnell, sealing the boy's sense of abandonment and unworthiness. Clarnell was unsure how to deal with her angry, unhappy son. Later, she admitted that Guy reminded her too much of her hated ex-husband. Perhaps this undercurrent of animosity, coupled with an oversized teenage boy who constantly complained, expressed jealousy towards his sisters, and exhibited bizarre behaviors, led to their more than strained relationship. To be honest, I've spent more time researching Ed's relationship with his mother and father than any of the sordid aspects of his crimes. This, I believe, is the key to attempting to unravel his motivations for the horrific murders he'd later commit. I believe Kemper's mother loved him. Why else would she take him in when he was an adult and after he'd already been convicted of a double murder? Some say she was controlling and kept him under her thumb all his life, but I have not found evidence of this. It appears to me that she wished nothing more at times than to be free of her son. He irritated her, and to be honest, I don't think she much liked Ed. He had an irritating personality and was a chronic complainer. In addition, according to her daughter Ellen, Clarnell was somewhat frightened of her son. She knew he was capable of hurting her, and they got into terrible arguments where his rage toward her was on full display. But she didn't think he would do well on his own. She felt the need to watch over him, to give him a place to live, and attempted to provide him with a stable home. However, according to Kemper's sisters, both he and his mom drank too much, had terrible tempers, and could be very cold and cutting with their words and behavior. It was a classic codependent relationship, toxic and harmful to both of them, but neither was unwilling to break their dysfunctional bond. While Clarnell is often described as a villain in this story, described as a hypercritical and domineering mother, most overlook the psychic damage done by Kemper's father. It was E. Kemper who introduced violent thoughts and images to his young son through war stories. It was also his father who collected weapons, guns, bayonets, and other war memorabilia, which fascinated the boy and became a lifelong obsession. And finally, and most importantly, it was his father who dealt the biggest psychic wound on Kemper by abandoning him not once but several times. E. Kemper left his family for 2 years for his job, but it's been said it was because his marriage had already started falling apart. He was absent from Ed's life between the ages of 4 and 6. He then left Ed permanently when he was about 9 years old. Finally, he rejected his son outright by turning him away when the 15-year-old was desperate for his father's love and attention. To ignore how this affected Kemper and may have contributed to his later actions is a serious oversight. And yet, you'd be hard-pressed to find almost any accounts of Kemper's life story that include this critical detail. Clarnell may have decided that her son's running away indicated his need for male attention and guidance. After Ed returned from California, she sent him to live with his paternal grandparents, Maud and Edmund Kemper I. Kemper's grandparents lived on a farm in North Fork, a rural town in Northern California. Clarnell kept in contact with her son and his grandmother through phone calls and letters. Maud Kemper told Clarnell that Ed was doing well and enjoyed spending time with his grandfather hunting and fishing. Ed I had bought his grandson a .22 caliber rifle and taught him to shoot. Maud was a writer of boys' fiction, and through her, Ed was introduced to wholesome books about boyhood adventures. She wrote to Clarnell saying that he was, quote, enjoying his gun and dog and great authors and school, end quote. Ed would later say that he and his grandmother didn't get along because she reminded him too much of his mother. Maud Kemper was a strong and outspoken woman, and her grandson felt that her, quote, bossiness and harsh tone of voice emasculated him and his grandfather. He especially disliked that Maud gave him chores he thought she should be doing, like washing dishes, vacuuming, and setting the table, while she worked outside the house on the farm. Ed complained that she was treating him, quote, like a girl, while she took on the masculine jobs. He believed his grandmother did this on purpose to humiliate him. Kemper went home for a visit during the summer of 1964. His sister Susan remembers spending time with her brother, who was still upset and despondent about being rejected by his father. Quote, he still seemed awfully hurt. It really sunk in that his dad didn't want him, Susan said in a 1973 interview. To buoy his spirits, they took Ed fishing and spent time together as a family. Then Kemper returned to North Fork. 2 weeks later, he killed his grandparents. On the morning of August 27, 1964, 15-year-old Ed Kemper prepared to go hunting. His grandfather had just left to run errands in town, and his grandmother was sitting at her typewriter, writing a short story for Boy's Life magazine. Over the years, Kemper would tell several versions of what he did next and why. Standing outside with his rifle, he saw his grandmother through the window. Her back was to him. He began thinking, quote, about all the times in the years I had been dealing with my mother and grandmother, end quote. He raised his weapon and shot at his grandmother, hitting her twice in the head and once in the back. He went inside and dragged her body to the bedroom. On the way, he grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Maud repeatedly. As he waited for his grandfather to return, he thought about what he'd done. He decided, quote, there was no way I was going to tell him what happened to his wife of 50 years, end quote. When his grandfather returned and began unloading the truck, Kemper walked up behind him and shot him at close range in the back of the head, killing him instantly. He dragged his body to the garage, closed the door, and attempted to wash the blood off of the driveway. He called his mother and told her what he'd done. Clarnell told him to call the police. She hung up and called them herself, and then called Ed back. He was threatening to kill himself, but said he, quote, couldn't find the gun. She told him to calm down and instructed him to go outside and sit on the porch until the police arrived. He followed her instructions. Later, when asked why he'd killed his grandparents, Kemper gave different answers. At first he said he, quote, guessed he was just mad at the world. Later, he would say he just wanted to know what it would feel like. Clarnell was still living in Montana and worked with authorities to remain in proximity to her son. After his arrest, they considered sending him to a juvenile facility in Montana. But to prevent this, Clarnell moved back to California. Ed was convicted of 2 counts of murder and remanded to a California Youth Authority correctional facility. He was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist presented his report to the court, diagnosing Kemper with paranoid schizophrenia disorder. The court determined that Kemper needed mental health treatment. He was transferred to the Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility that houses and provides psychiatric treatment for mentally ill convicts. We all have our morning routines. For me, it's getting out of bed, having a good stretch, slipping into some warm socks, and then padding into the kitchen for a big glass of water. For some reason, drinking water first thing in the morning starts my day off right. Of course, it's essential that my drinking water is safe and clean to drink. Unfortunately, according to extensive research by the Environmental Working Group, virtually every home in America has harmful contaminants in its tap water. That's why I urge you to check out AquaTrue. AquaTrue purifiers use a 4-stage reverse osmosis purification process that removes 15 times more contaminants than ordinary pitcher filters and are specifically designed to combat chemicals in your water supply. AquaTrue filters are affordable and long-lasting. No changing filters every 2 to 3 months. AquaTrue filters last from 6 months to 2 years. AquaTrue has purifiers to fit every type of home, from installation-free countertop purifiers to higher capacity under-sink options. You can choose what best fits your needs. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and even makes a great gift. Today, my listeners receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com. That's AQUATRU.com and enter code ONCE at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use promo code ONCE. I have a saying, when you keep learning, you keep growing. And when you stop learning, you stop living. My New Year's resolution for 2025 is to learn a new skill. Actually, that's my New Year's resolution every year. And what's more exciting than learning a new language? Learning a new language can help you connect with others and explore new cultures. Rosetta Stone is the most trusted language learning program available on desktop or as an app. Learning a language with Rosetta Stone truly immerses you in any language you want to learn. And I do mean any language. Whether you want to learn or improve your skills in Spanish, French, Italian, or Japanese, Rosetta Stone offers 25 languages. For fast language acquisition, there's no better way to learn than through Rosetta Stone's immersive courses. With no English translations, you really learn to speak, listen, and think in that language, and it's designed for long-term retention. Start the new year off with a resolution you can reach. Today, Once Upon a Crime listeners can take advantage of this: Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/once. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/once today. As we step into the new year, it's time to get excited about those changes we plan to make in 2025. If one of your goals is to once and for all be in control of your weight, Weight Loss by Hers is the weight loss solution that works. Weight Loss by Hers customers report losing up to an average of 9 pounds in their first month, based on their personalized compounded GLP-1 treatment plans. Hers offers a holistic weight loss program with personalized solutions, including compounded GLP-1 weekly injections, featuring the same active ingredient as Ozempic and Wegovy, or oral medication kits. Weight loss plans are more affordable through Hers, with compounded GLP-1 injections starting at $165 a month, with a 12-month plan paid up front for new subscribers. No hidden fees and no membership fees. So if you've been struggling to lose weight, it's time you find the best option that works for you through Hers. Start your initial free online visit today at forhers.com/once. That's forhers.com/once for your personalized weight loss treatment options. forhers.com/once. Hers weight loss is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not FDA approved or verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. Restrictions apply. Wegovy and Ozempic are not compounded. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've got this problem: time. I'm a one-woman band over here in both my business and personal life. I'm in charge of planning meals, shopping for ingredients, cooking, and cleaning up. So spending a lot of time meal planning and shopping, well, that makes it challenging to stick to my healthy eating goals. But that all changed thanks to Hungry Root. It's the easiest way to eat healthy. Check it out. Hungry Root delivers healthy food right to your door weekly, tailored to your tastes and needs. Hungry Root is like having your own personal shopper and nutritionist all in one. They take care of the weekly grocery shopping, recommending healthy groceries and meals you'll love, whether you want heat and eat meals or you like to cook a little. Even with my busy schedule, I enjoy cooking. Hungry Root recipes can be made in just 15 minutes or less. That's perfect for me. And I love how fast and simple it was to order and schedule my first delivery. You take an easy and fun quiz online, answering questions about your needs, such as how many meals you want covered, what kind of foods and snacks you enjoy, and your dietary needs, restrictions, and preferences. Then, Hungry Root builds a box for you. I was able to swap out any items I didn't want and add extra items I did so easily. I can't wait to receive my first Hungry Root box. I ordered a combination box with groceries, healthy snacks and prepared proteins, and recipes with all the ingredients I can quickly pull together on a busy weeknight. And I added heat and eat egg bites for breakfast, my fave. I got to pick old favorites and try out some new tastes and recipes as well. I'm very excited. I know you're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box. Plus, get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/once and use code ONCE. That's hungryroot.com/once, code ONCE, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/once, code ONCE. Ed Kemper served 5 years at Atascadero State Hospital. While there, he was described as cooperative and well-behaved. He underwent a series of tests and evaluations, including an IQ test, in which he scored 136, and later was rescored at 145. To provide reference to what this indicates, an IQ score between 86 and 114 is considered average intelligence. A score between 115 and 129 is rated above average. Between 130 and 144 is moderately gifted, and above 145 is considered highly gifted. There is no genius rating on the IQ scale. Kemper's score of 136 placed him firmly in the moderately gifted scale. His second test score at 145 placed him just over the line to be considered highly gifted. He would have needed to score 15 points higher to rate as exceptionally gifted. This means that the commonly held belief that Kemper is regarded as a genius is a myth, and probably one he perpetuated himself. In fact, a high school friend recalls that Kemper was merely an average student. He'd often tease his much taller classmates, saying, "You may be taller than me, but I'm smarter." Kemper's psychiatrists at Atascadero determined that the court-appointed psychologist had misdiagnosed him. Their tests concluded that he was not paranoid schizophrenic. They re-diagnosed him as having a passive-aggressive personality trait disturbance. In their opinion, this new diagnosis made it possible for Kemper to be rehabilitated. While personality disorders are persistent, lifelong patterns of inflexible, unhealthy behaviors and thought processes, people with personality disorders are said to have control over their behavior. Those diagnosed with mental illnesses also have impaired thinking or behavior due to a disruption in brain functioning, which is outside of their control. However, personality disorders are notoriously difficult to treat because the patient does have control of the outcome by choosing to cooperate with treatment and make changes or decide not to. At Atascadero, Kemper stood out from the other seriously mentally ill inmates. Because he was so high-functioning in comparison, he knew how to charm his doctors and other hospital staff. As a result, he was given special privileges and duties. He was even allowed to assist in administering psychological tests to other patients. Kemper would secretly read the doctor's reports to learn how patients were evaluated and what was presented to the court to determine their rehabilitation. In this way, he learned to manipulate his doctors. All the while, Kemper continued to harbor dark, violent fantasies. He sat in on sessions with sexual offenders who were receiving treatment at Atascadero to record notes. He used this opportunity to learn how these predators operated. How did they choose victims? How did they gain their trust? One detail he specifically took to heart was something he heard repeatedly from these sex offenders. If you leave a living witness, you're sure to get caught. Because Kemper was a minor when he committed his crime, California law at that time only allowed a term of incarceration until his 21st birthday, even for murder. In 1969, at age 21, Kemper was deemed fit to return to society. He was discharged from Atascadero Hospital and sent back to California Youth Authority. There, he would work with the parole board on his transition plan after release. One recommendation his doctors at Atascadero made to CYA authorities was that, in their opinion, he should not be returned to his mother, for whom he still expressed strong hostility. They believed their dynamic was a trigger for his rage. I must interject here to provide additional details about Kemper's first incarceration. His mother kept in contact with him, traveling to visit her son every 2 weeks. She also ensured he had what he needed. By Kemper's own admission, he reached out to his father several times, writing him letters and asking him to visit. But he only saw him once, soon after his arrest, and didn't hear from him again. Upon his release, Kemper was first sent to a transitional halfway house. While there, he enrolled in community college and earned straight A's. Against the recommendation of his doctors, the parole board allowed him to relocate to Santa Cruz and reside with his mother. In the summer of 1971, Kemper moved to Clarnell's duplex at 609 Ord Street in Aptos, Santa Cruz County. Clarnell had been married twice more, but was now divorced and living alone. She was working as an administrative assistant at UC Santa Cruz. The home she now shared with her son was located just down the road from two college campuses, UCSC and Cabrillo College, a 2-year college in Aptos. Since Kemper was sent away to serve his time, the world had changed quite a bit. In 5 years, the counterculture movement had sprung up in the California Bay Area. Young people wore their hair long. Facial hair for men, bell-bottom jeans, brightly colored tie-dye t-shirts, and fringe vests were standard wear for 20-year-old men in Santa Cruz County. Kemper, who stood out like a sore thumb everywhere he went because of his 6'8" height, felt totally square in his polyester shirts and slacks. He went shopping and outfitted himself with regular jeans and t-shirts. He still appeared conservative and older than his 22 years. Later, he added a fringe-trimmed suede jacket in an attempt to look more hip. He soon became contemptuous of people his age, whom he referred to as dirty hippies. Kemper's goal was to become a police officer, if you can believe it. To this end, he took criminology courses at the local community college. However, he was crushed to learn that his height disqualified him from being considered for a position with the police department. You might be asking, how could a double murderer be eligible to serve as a law enforcement officer? Because his crime was a juvenile offense, the murder charge was expunged from his record in November 1972. It was as if the murders of his grandparents had never happened at all, at least on paper. That's wild. Kemper was hired as a gas station attendant in Santa Cruz. He was a cop groupie and hung out with off-duty officers at a Santa Cruz bar called the Jury Room. He became friendly with several Santa Cruz police officers and sheriff's deputies. They nicknamed him Big Ed. He was described as a friendly nuisance who chattered endlessly, asking questions about their cases and bragging about his knowledge of criminal psychology. As you probably suspected, things between Ed and his mother were not going well. Clarnell was a highly valued employee at UCSC. Her boss and coworkers said she was smart, generous, and fun-loving, but had a sharp wit that sometimes could cut you to the bone. Still, she was so excited about her son's return that she threw a party for him and invited everyone to come and welcome him home. However, she claimed that her son Guy had been away at boarding school. I have kind of a personal story to share with you about this party. A family member of mine was an attorney and a longtime resident of Santa Cruz. He knew Clarnell because he taught a couple of classes at the college in the department in which she worked. He was invited to Ed's coming home party. He says this, quote, "I was at her house. I met him. He's this 6'9", 280-pound guy. I found him to be charming, but he didn't seem like a boarding school kid," end quote. About Clarnell, he says this, "She was nice and very efficient." However, those who knew Clarnell personally admit that she was a heavy drinker. While at work, she was always professional and responsible, but she liked to drink during her off hours. Remember, Clarnell was about 6'1" or 6'2", so she could probably hold her liquor. She and her son would drink together, and this always ended in loud arguments and sometimes even physical altercations. Ed would deny that there were physical fights, but his sister Ellen reports that her mother told her that Guy had hit her and she was afraid of him. Ellen said her mother sometimes courted trouble because when drunk, she could be very harsh with her words. Kemper hated it the most when his mother would say with contempt, "You're just like your father." Kemper also admitted they both drank heavily and would get into drunken arguments. Quote, "I was drinking on average 7 to 7.5 gallons of cheap wine a week," he admitted. "My mother was drinking about 3 gallons, end quote. The tension and fighting grew worse. Neighbors could hear them yelling at each other, but not what was said. Finally, Kemper secured a good job with the California Highway Department as a road maintenance worker. He left Santa Cruz and moved to Alameda, about an hour and a half north, to be closer to his job. He shared an apartment with the male roommate. Kemper dreamed of being a motorcycle cop. Although this dream didn't pan out, he purchased a bike with the money he earned from his new job. But soon, he was hit by a car and injured. He filed a lawsuit against the driver and was paid a settlement of $15,000, or over $100,000 today. Whoa. He purchased a car with some of the settlement, a 1969 Ford Galaxy. It was in this car that he began cruising and picking up hitchhikers. At first, he just played out his fantasies mentally. They always ended in violence in these scenarios. Kemper felt the only way he could possess a woman completely was if she were dead. He had always been obsessed with death. There have been many reports of this since he was a child, whether he was play acting at executions or causing harm to animals. He was just fascinated by everything having to do with corpses. A boy his age whom Kemper knew while living with his grandparents tells one such story. A neighbor of Kemper's grandfather passed away, and his wife called him for help. Kemper accompanied his grandfather to wait for the coroner. Who wants to make a bet this was voluntary? What, no takers? When the coroner arrived, he asked Ed and his grandfather, who were both big men, to help him carry the body out of the house. Kemper talked about this for days, fascinated with the details. He described the body bag the man had been placed in, how it felt to carry the corpse, etc. It struck me that he seemed a tad obsessed with helping carry the corpse out of the house, his friend said. It struck me as quite unusual. Kemper, at age 22, was still a virgin. He had no personal relationships with girls, but was obsessed with sex. Something in his past, perhaps when he was a very small boy, caused the wires in his brain to cross, in which sexual arousal could only be achieved by associating it with violence and death. How or when this happened has never been fully explained, even with the years of psychiatric testing and mental health treatment he received. It makes you wonder what passed for rehabilitative therapy in those days. His motorcycle injury prevented Kemper from continuing his job on the road crew, so he returned to Santa Cruz and once again moved in with Clarnell. Quick observation. He had all that money from the settlement, hated living with his mother, and blamed her for all his problems. Why in God's name didn't baby Huey just rent an apartment somewhere and live on his own? Some genius. Now with a car and no reason to work for a living, Kemper had plenty of time to go cruising for victims. He began rehearsing his ultimate plan for murder by spending hours driving along California highways, picking up hitchhikers. At first, he'd pick up anyone he saw, men, women, alone or together. First, he wanted to know if they'd accept a ride from a lone male of his size and appearance. He soon discovered that most hitchhikers weren't afraid of him, and he even had many friendly conversations with his passengers. Then he became selective of whom he picked up. He settled on a type he wanted to possess. He looked for lone, younger female hitchhikers who appeared more, quote, upscale. He didn't pick up hippie girls, whom he described as dirty and unkempt. Kemper would say that he would go hunting for victims after he and his mother got into a big fight. Every time this happened, he claimed that he had the urge to kill again. But what I discovered by creating a timeline of significant events in his life, alongside the dates of the murders, was that Kemper killed his first victim soon after he tracked down his father. He'd had no contact with E. Kemper except once during his incarceration. By the time Kemper was released, his father had moved from his previous residence and hadn't informed his son where he'd gone. In early 1972, Kemper tracked him down through the electricians' union in Los Angeles. He called his father, and after a short phone conversation, asked if he could visit. His father was willing to get together, but told his son that his wife was afraid to have him in the house. Instead, he offered to meet him at a restaurant. Kemper traveled to Southern California and had dinner and drinks with his father. He claimed that during that meeting, his father had, quote, forgiven him for killing his parents. It was the last time he'd see his father. I will review a summary and timeline of Ed Kemper's crimes, but I won't get into the details. You've probably encountered them often enough on documentaries, shows, and podcasts. Frankly, we've all heard about the murders, dismemberments, incidents of necrophilia, Kemper's claims of cannibalizing some of his victims, etc., ad nauseum over the years, and I don't feel it's necessary to repeat these details. I've included links to my research in the show notes if you'd like to read about them. On May 7th, Kemper picked up two Fresno State College students, Mary Ann Pesky and Anita Lucchesa, both 18, while they were hitchhiking on Ashby Avenue in Berkeley, California. He took them to a wooded area near Alameda, California, and stabbed and strangled them to death. He was still living in Alameda at this time. This is another reason I don't entirely buy the "my mother made me do it" excuse. He took the bodies of his victims to his apartment. His roommate was away. After dismembering them, he disposed of the remains in the Santa Cruz Mountains. On September 14th, Ed Kemper picked up 15-year-old Aiko Koo on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley, where she'd been waiting for a bus to go to a dance class in San Francisco. He drove her to a remote area in Santa Cruz County where he killed her. He took her body to his mother's home and later dismembered it. He disposed of some of the body parts in Alameda and some in the woods near Boulder Creek. It was in late 1972 that Kemper moved back in with his mother, after the third murder. 2 weeks after killing Aiko Koo, Kemper asked his 17-year-old girlfriend to marry him, and she said yes. Yes, he had a girlfriend. Shocked? The girl, whose name has been kept out of most records due to her age, and because her family strongly fought to keep her anonymous, met Kemper in June of 1972 and became engaged to him 4 months later. He'd worked at her brother-in-law's gas station in Santa Cruz. She lived in Northern California, in the town of Turlock, and was visiting her sister in Santa Cruz that summer when she was introduced to 23-year-old Kemper. They began a long-distance romance. She was still in high school and would start her senior year that fall. They decided to marry after she graduated. Authorities later interviewed the girl. She reported that they never had sex and there was very little physical contact between them. Kemper would visit her in Turlock, driving up on the weekends. Her father reported that Kemper had been a visitor in their home several times. Turlock is about a 2-hour drive from Santa Cruz, so Kemper would stay overnight, sharing a room with his fiancé's brother. A month earlier, on January 7th, Ed Kemper, now living with his mother in Santa Cruz, picked up 18-year-old Cindy Schall near Cabrillo College, drove her to a wooded area, and shot her. He took the body back to his house, later dismembering her. He buried parts of her body in the backyard and disposed of the rest by discarding the remains off a coastal cliff. On February 5th, he picked up 2 hitchhikers separately, driving his car with a UC Santa Cruz University sticker on it, which he'd obtained from his mother, an employee at the college. He first gave a ride to 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe, and then stopped for 20-year-old Ellison Liu. Both were hitchhiking on the UCSC campus. He stopped his vehicle and shot Thorpe, who was sitting in the front seat, and then turned and shot Liu. Their bodies were also taken to the home he shared with his mother, where he dismembered them. Kemper disposed of the remains the next day. Some were later found at Eden Canyon, and others near Highway 1. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, Kemper stayed at his fiancée's house for the last time. Her father told authorities that Kemper had terrible table manners and would stay up late into the night talking loudly with his son. He'd finally had enough, so he threw Kemper out of the house and told him he was no longer welcome. February 5th was the date of Kemper's last murder, the double murder of the 2 UC Santa Cruz students. More than 2 months passed before his final murder, the murder of his mother and her friend. On April 1st, Kemper's sister Susan came to Santa Cruz to stay with her mother and brother. Clarnell was recovering from an injured shoulder, and Susan drove her to and from work and helped around the house. She recalled having a pleasant visit and was glad to see her brother, who seemed in good spirits. They did discuss the missing girls. By this time, one of the victims' remains, Mary Ann Pesky, whom he'd picked up in Berkeley and killed in Alameda, had been found. Kemper commented that his fiancée was so frightened by the reports of the missing girls that he'd had to convince her it was safe to come to Santa Cruz. On April 6th, the day before his sister was to leave Santa Cruz, Kemper took her, his mother, and his fiancée to San Francisco for a day trip. They visited Fisherman's Wharf and the Wax Museum. His fiancée later told investigators that at the museum, Kemper had become nauseous after they viewed a mock guillotine with a beheaded mannequin. Easter Sunday fell on April 22nd, and Kemper's fiancée called him on Thursday, inviting him to her house for the holiday. He declined, saying that he had, quote, important business to take care of that weekend. At 5 a.m. on Saturday, April 20th, Kemper went into the bedroom where his mother was sleeping, hit her with a claw hammer, and then slashed her throat. The cut to her throat was so deep, she was nearly decapitated. Kemper said he decided to, quote, take her head off to make sure she was dead. He stripped her of her clothes and pushed her body to the back of a closet before cleaning up the bedroom. All the other gruesome stories you've probably heard about what he did with the head and the actions he took after killing his mother, he didn't say anything about that in the initial interviews with the police. He added those details later. Investigators have long suspected that a lot of what he later told psychiatrists and his attorneys were embellishments. His final victim would be Sally Hallett, a friend of his mother's. He explained the reason for her murder during his initial interview. It was Easter weekend, and he worried that if his sister or others didn't hear from his mother on the holiday, they'd come looking for her. Once she was discovered dead in her home, he knew he'd be immediately suspected. But if his mother and her friend were both found dead, it would look more like an intruder had killed them, or so he speculated. And because the two women went drinking together, the cops might theorize they'd encountered a dangerous stranger in a bar. So he devised a ruse to lure Sally Hallett to the house. He chose Mrs. Hallett because she was single and lived alone, and he assumed she wouldn't be immediately missed. This would give him more time to get away and devise an alibi. He called her and told her he'd gotten a raise and was going to surprise his mother by taking her out to dinner and a movie. He asked Sally if she'd like to join them. She agreed. Kemper told her to come by around 7:30 that evening. When she arrived, he strangled her to death, stripped off her clothes, took her money out of her purse, and had sex with her corpse. He then put her body in another closet. Afterward, he went to the jury room and had a couple of drinks before returning home. Kemper packed up Mrs. Hallett's car with his guns, clothes, and other items and left Santa Cruz the next morning. 4 days later, he called the Santa Cruz Police Department from Pueblo, Colorado, to turn himself in. He later claimed that he planned to take his own life, but couldn't go through with it. He thought by this time he was most surely a wanted man. He was terrified of being shot by police when they caught him. Fun fact, they didn't even discover the bodies until after he confessed. Kemper was taken into custody by Pueblo police. Investigators from Santa Cruz County arrived the next day to interview him. He confessed to the murders of his mother and Mrs. Hallett. He then proceeded to confess to the murders of 6 girls and women: Mary Ann Pesky, Anita Mary Lucchesa, Aiko Koo, Cindy Shaw, Rosalind Thorpe, and Ellison Liu. Upon his return to California, Kemper took officers from Alameda to Santa Cruz County to the sites where his victims' remains were buried or dumped. On the 3-day trip by car back to Santa Cruz, Kemper talked for hours, sharing the details of his gruesome crimes. Sergeant Mickey Alufi, a Santa Cruz County deputy sheriff who sat next to Kemper on the drive to California, said, quote, "During the ride back, Kemper just talked nonstop. I was thinking, give me a break. I never said that because I wanted him to keep talking, but silently, I wished he'd just shut up," end quote. The Santa Cruz District Attorney's Office investigator, Richard Verbrugge, added, "It got sickening. We couldn't shut him up." Lieutenant Chuck Shearer, who rode in the passenger seat, said, "He continually talked about the problems he'd had during his life. I didn't see any remorse in anything he discussed with us." Edmund Kemper was indicted on 8 counts of murder. There was no question as to his guilt. Not only had he given a full confession, complete with extremely detailed descriptions of each murder, but the head of one of his victims, Cindy Shaw, was dug up from Kemper's backyard. He also led investigators to the precise locations where other remains were found. Chillingly, bone fragments determined to belong to Aiko Koo were found on Rodeo Gulch Road, the same road where the Ota mansion was located. On May 7, 1973, Kemper's attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Next week, I'll bring you the details of Kemper's trial, the verdict, and his life in prison. While awaiting trial, Kemper was transferred from the Santa Cruz County Jail and incarcerated in San Mateo County. There he met and butted heads with another Santa Cruz serial killer, Herbert Mullen. At the same time Kemper was abducting and murdering young women, Herbert Mullen began a campaign of murder with the delusional belief that doing so would prevent a cataclysmic earthquake from destroying California. His kill count would number 13, higher than both Frazier's and Kemper's, and would cause Santa Cruz County DA Peter Chang to wearily state, "Right now, Santa Cruz must be the murder capital of the world." Join me next week as I wrap up the series, Murder City. That will do it for this episode of Once Upon a Crime, and we'll conclude part 2 of the series, Murder City, Santa Cruz, California, 1970 to 1973. Make sure to follow Once Upon a Crime on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. We're also on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel to watch documentary-style videos of each episode. I've included a link in the show notes, or just look for Once Upon a Crime podcast on YouTube. Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Sanchez Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia, and additional research for this episode was provided by Emma Battaglia. I'll be back next week to conclude the series Murder City, and I hope you'll join me then. Until next time, be good to one another.